trustees, principals, staff, students of Chowghle College, friends. I wanted to share with you my journey in chess right from the beginning. I learned chess when I was 6. I saw my elder siblings play with each other, my brother and sister, and immediately went to my mother and pestered her if she could teach me as well, which she did. Then in about 6 months, they noticed that I actually seemed to be quite interested in chess. So my sister found a chess club near where we lived, and I enrolled in the Tal Chess Club. And pretty soon along rolled my first chess tournament. Of course, I lost my first 3 games. And this meant that, of course, I dropped to the bottom of the pairing chart, and there was an odd number of participants. So I got the bye, which is my first win in chess. And I remember that I sat there waiting for the hour to pass so that I could claim my bye, and then I remember being so proud and happy of this win. It's a bit embarrassing now, but I still think that when you're 6 or 7, you can enjoy something like in a way we forget to do later. After that, I had a few fun years where there was no specific goal or anything in mind. I was just playing, trying to get better, and playing in competitions. So the main thing is my mother thought I should play every weekend. And so I would go every weekend and play either the tournament or just play with for fun. And it seemed that I was not making a lot of progress. But this is deceptive because you actually can't tell if you're making progress or not. In 1982, I suddenly moved up a notch, and I cannot really say why. I was playing the same tournaments with the same players, but suddenly I started scoring much better. So I did well in a couple of tournaments, and then actually I got the chance to come to Goa twice. I came here for the National Sub-Junior Championship, and then a couple of months later for the National Junior Chess Championship. And I won both of them. So I still have very, very pleasant memories of this because Goa was really the place where I broke through into Indian chess. And after that, the next thing that beckoned was the title of a grandmaster. Now, at that point, no Indian had become a grandmaster ever. So this was a big challenge for every one of us. In fact, the one question that we were asked in chess circles was simply, when will India have a grandmaster? In 1987, I spent 85 and 86 trying for the grandmaster title. I came close on several occasions, but never quite managed to clinch it. I was always just a half-point short. And then I decided to, or was decided for me if you like, I had to actually finish my 12th standard exams. So, but the truth is I had already begun to get a bit bored chasing this GM title, and it became a bit frustrating and so on. So I took 3 months off, so January to March when the exams happened. I took those 3 months off to try and quickly catch up on my studies, and I didn't get a chance to look at a chessboard for 3 months. So I think the other students found it very hard to understand why there was one boy here who really seemed to enjoy studying. But the thing is, I was already a little bit sick of chess, and I was just happy to get some change. Of course, right after this, I immediately, after the exams, I tried to get back on track to get my GM title. And this time it went much faster. I won the World Junior Championship in July. And then by December, I'd become a grandmaster. And so what happens? Why does this suddenly happen? That you're working very hard for something, you don't get it. And then one day you stop thinking about it, and suddenly it just happens. Well, the usual explanation is pressure, and I think that's correct. But I think also, if something stops being pleasurable and it simply becomes a sort of a goal, then it's much harder to perform well. And I think these 3 months when I did my exams and then came back to chess allowed me to appreciate it much more. What I was really missing in chess a little bit before. And I think that's why I got my grandmaster title by the end of that year. Then a very funny thing happened to me, where right after I got my grandmaster title, and basically you get the grandmaster title by achieving certain performance levels for 3 tournaments. So if you meet the target, you get a norm, you do it twice or thrice, you get 3 norms, and then you get your title. Suddenly, after becoming a grandmaster, I couldn't attain the level anymore. I was no longer making norms for about 2 or 3 tournaments. And I spoke to another grandmaster, and he said basically it happens to everyone. Right after you become a grandmaster, nobody makes, first 6 months are always at the write-off, so don't worry about it too much. And here I think what's different is, for many years, as soon as I came to a tournament, I knew what I had to do. You knew that at the end of this tournament, I need to have 7 points because that's the target, or 7.5 or 6.5 or whatever. But everything was set. You had a very clear goal. But once you become a grandmaster, well, the title is never going to be taken away from you. So suddenly you don't have this thing in front of you, and you lose this focus completely. It also eases the pressure on you a bit. You think, well, I can make 6.5, but I can make 6 as well. It's no big deal. And suddenly you go completely off. I think it's similar in, let's say, cycling, when it's much easier to keep your pace if there are other people around you, like a peloton, rather than if you're simply cycling alone, because you have nothing to compare yourself with. Anyway, this period slowly passed. At some point you understand that you get a bit fed up of these sort of lousy performances, and then you return to normalcy again. But I think it shows that the importance of having a very specific goal in front of you. Not every goal can be so easy like a grandmaster title, in the sense of giving you something easy to target. But it's very important to have something that you're aiming for or looking forward to. After that, I had to break into the higher levels of chess, the world top. And the first thing was to gain rating points, ranking points, go around the world, playing everywhere. So I had a couple of years of this, basically in 1988, 1989, just enjoyed myself, traveled around, missed as much college as I could. And then in 91, I actually became a candidate. That means I was in the last 16 for the World Championship. And this meant that suddenly all sorts of new doors started opening for me. I had invitations to some of the best tournaments in the world, and well, that's very exciting. So it was a very pleasant period. But initially it was enough for me just to have one good achievement per tournament, because that's what all people really expected from you. So if I reached the tournament and I beat Karpov or I finished third, it was enough, and you didn't have to say anything more. But after a couple of months of this, it started to feel a bit hollow. I found that it was no longer so satisfying just having one little thing that you can hide behind in the tournament. You actually want to do well. So this hunger helped me first do very well in a tournament in the Netherlands in October. And then in December, I won a tournament ahead of both Karpov and Kasparov in Italy. And that was a huge breakthrough for me. Then something funny started to happen. Whereas the whole of 91, all the top players were saying what a talented boy I was and how I had a great future. After I won this tournament, they started saying that I was very weak and actually I'm missing lots of qualities and what have you. And I found this very strange, that you can be talented before you win the tournament, and after you win it, somehow you're not so talented. But I think it's more a thing of when people feel threatened by you, they're not so nice. And as long as you're not really threatening them, then they're very sweet to you. But still, it's a bit bizarre that right after winning the tournament, I had to read what a weak player I was. So, after that, again, I went through a period of about 8 years where I was searching for the World Championship. I would come very close on many occasions, but always just miss by a little bit. And it's again this phase. You can see it happening again and again. I needed to miss something several times before you finally get it right. Mainly what happens is it begins to sink in a very profound way that something isn't complete till you actually do it 100%. And coming close, initially it always feels satisfying, but at some point you have to get past that and actually get the job done. So each time I found that this thing tended to happen. I became world champion. And now the same thing happened to me again that happened to me in when I became a grandmaster, that my level just dropped off. Again, it's mainly a thing of emptiness, that when you win something really big that's been dominating your thinking for a long time, suddenly you don't know what to do with yourself next. So, funnily enough, in the period when I started playing badly, initially I had good results. So I did well in a tournament in Holland, and I won a tournament in Mexico. But the danger signs were already there. And because the results were still good, I was not paying much attention. But the thing is, people perhaps because of my reputation or because of one reason or the other, had not started to punish me yet. And so I felt that there was no real urgency, there was nothing really happening. But then that year in July, I had the worst result of my life in a tournament in Dortmund, in Germany. And this, I started off with 2 losses in the first half. And I made a decision which I kind of regret. Mentally, I just gave up on the tournament. I thought, there's just nothing to do here. But I'm going to try and get out with as little damage as possible. So my aim was just to minimize my losses and get the tournament over with and run away. In fact, this proved very difficult to do. I lost 2 more games and finished in last place, and probably simply the worst result of my career. It's very hard to just settle on some sort of bad performance. Sometimes even if you want to do an average performance, you have to try for something higher, and you might get an average performance. But if you aim for an average performance, chances are you'll get a disaster. And then I had a stretch of maybe 8 or 9 months where nothing seemed to work. By this point, I was drastically changing everything in my routine. Of course, it would have been nicer to make these changes before the disaster, which is one thing I learned, is that you have to smell danger a little bit earlier and get this feeling for when your chess isn't at the level it needs to be, and address the problems much quicker. But more to the point, after this disaster, I was experimenting and trying many, many different things. But just nothing seemed to work. My results just stayed quite bad. Anyway, things went till about mid-2002, and what happened then was I went to a rapid tournament, which is my favorite kind of chess. I generally like rapid chess and playing games much faster. And I was quite surprised that in the press, hardly anyone even mentioned me as a favorite for that tournament. I mean, it was just a year ago where I was considered a favorite in almost every kind of tournament, and suddenly you come to something and people are not even looking at you. But I actually decided that was very enjoyable. For once, after many, many months, there was no pressure on me whatsoever. And I felt very relaxed. I went to the tournament. We were just having quiet evenings every day. And I was able to focus on the chess like nothing. But also because I had lost my world title by that point, I had lost my second place in the world rankings, many things I think. suddenly I felt very liberated to play again very freely and happily, without this baggage of having to do something and so on. And it probably wouldn't surprise you to know that I won the tournament very easily. So now that tournament in itself didn't open every door, but for me it was a good sign that at least my crisis had sort of finished. After that, the rest of the year I recovered, and then I spent many years, but there was a lot of chaos in the structure of the world cycle. So what I had to do was simply play as many tournaments as possible and just enjoy myself. And it was a very pleasant stage because I was traveling, playing tournaments, and there was nothing specific to do. I couldn't play for the world title because there were simply no matches. And I only had to enjoy chess, but that worked very well. So I actually, for 2003 and 4, I won the, we have something called the Chess Oscar, which is for the best player in that year. It's done by vote and so on. I won those quite easily, and then in 2007, I had a chance to play for a world title again. So after like a 6 or 7 year break, finally I could play a world title match again. And this was going to be in Mexico City. So at the beginning of that year, I lost 2 games to 2 potential rivals, Kramnik and Topalov. And as you will find out, I actually played matches against both of them, but we'll come to that. So I lost 2 games in the first tournament of the year, in January. There's a tournament in Holland, which is now in its 70th edition, and well, 75th actually. So it's a huge tradition in chess, and it's the first big event of the year. And there I actually lost 2 games, but what worried me even more was that I lost 2 games with the black pieces. And I think in the whole of 2006, I had hardly lost with the black pieces because I was very, very stable with that color. So, but I remembered what I had told myself in 2001, that when the first signs of danger come, you should react very quickly and not wait for a catastrophe before you start to react. And I say this because I managed to salvage the tournament. I won some games after I lost these 2, and actually had a decent finish. I didn't win the tournament or anything, but decent enough that I could leave without feeling too embarrassed. And then if you have an okay result, you can also excuse yourself and not worry about things. But this time I felt this danger very powerfully, and so I decided to immediately spend a lot of energy working on my black repertoire again, and to try and strengthen that part of the game. So I actually won the next tournament I played in Linares in Mexico. So it was a nice precursor, if you like. And later that year in September, I won the World Championship in Mexico City. So at least this time I felt that this complacency which set in earlier, I'd managed to address much quicker. And so there's a very simple lesson. If you must always be critical about yourself without ever damaging your self-confidence. Now, it sounds very easy, but the point is not to be so critical that you lose confidence in your abilities, but never to go too easy on yourself. And this time I managed to work in a very focused way for Mexico, but as soon as the signals of trouble came along, I remembered what happened earlier and tried to address them quicker. And then we moved into a different stage in the world title series. So what used to happen was there used to be matches, that is matches between 2 players. But in between there was a long stretch when we had knockouts, which are 128 players, and then you play elimination matches, or tournaments like in Mexico where I won the title. But now we moved back to the older tradition of playing one-on-one matches. And I was going to play someone called Kramnik, who had actually been world champion just a few years before. Against him, I found that the opening I used all my life, so it's 1e4 for those of you who know, is particularly ineffective against him. I found that he tends to be very strong against it. So I had to take the decision of whether I wanted to stick to my known area or go off somewhere else. And I decided that the most important thing was to take a decision quickly. By that I mean not to keep two options for too long. So roughly I'll tell you the time frame. November I had to take a call on what I was going to do, and the match was next October. But my point was simply that if I take a decision quickly, then we can work 10 or 11 months on what's going to happen. Or I can keep two options open for a few months and try to take a more informed decision. But then when I take the more informed decision, we'll have only 4 or 5 months to work exclusively on that. And so my decision was to leave the opening I was going to play, that I used to play all my life, and shift into his territory. So a bit risky. And now there is no easy way to take these decisions. And I think it's sometimes said that you have to take very logical decisions, and especially chess players are supposed to be very good at this, which is you evaluate your options very carefully, you try to compare, and so on. But sometimes there is no real answer. Both options will have pros and cons. It seemed to be more important that I just take an intuitive decision, and it didn't matter whether I took it in 5 minutes or in 1 day. Well, actually, I took it in 5 minutes and then pretended to think for the rest of the day, but anyway. And then once I did that option, just to throw all my resources on that, so that could be strengthened a lot. So a couple of risky decisions, but I felt that it was very important for me to do that, because Kramnik was a very effective match player, and if I didn't do something which drastically changed the rules of the game, if you like, then he would enter a sort of comfort zone, and it would be very difficult to draw him out. For instance, about 8 years before this match, Kasparov had played a match against Kramnik, where Kramnik completely outsmarted him in terms of thinking before the match what was going to happen. And Kasparov actually didn't manage to win a single game in that whole match, and didn't manage to, I think he didn't even get an advantage in one game. So sort of extreme, and that was exactly the thing I was afraid of. In fact, it went like a dream, and so you shouldn't necessarily assume that every time you take a decision like this, it'll go like a dream. That was my best match so far, and sometimes just everything falls your way. You can't have that level of success every time, but still, sometimes you have to take huge risks if you want, let's say, huge rewards. The next match after that was going to be in Sofia with Veselin Topalov, and this was in 2010. Here, I knew that even if I took big risks, my opponent would be expecting me to take something or do something very unusual. So already the surprise value would be much lower than the earlier match. And so this time the main thing was to dampen my expectations a bit of success and just get prepared for a hard slog. In fact, as if to prime me for this, a volcano went off in Iceland, and of course European airspace was shut down, and we took a van ride for about 40 hours, which is not a dream preparation scenario, but somehow we got there in one piece and could then start playing this match. Here it was a very seesaw match. Never managed to get a grip, and actually my opponent changed his approach in significant ways. So you could see that people were reacting to how I prepared for the previous match and doing very, very unusual things. The other thing is Topalov seemed to think that it was very important to keep annoying me psychologically. So this means, giving sort of slightly disparaging interviews, or during the game he would not talk to me at all. He started this thing of only playing a draw at the very end. Nothing illegal, but you could see that he's trying to wind you up. And so it's very important to find some way to deal with that. Earlier in my life, especially in the 90s, I found that in these kind of situations I tended to crumble entirely. And so what I did for this time was, simply try to imagine the prospect of him becoming world champion. and deciding that you want to stop that. So, I mean, you can do any sort of mental thought process you like, but you have to find something that is convincing and that will. But again, just like I mentioned earlier, the most important thing is simply to be aware of what's happening. The fact that I was aware that I could crumble was the most important thing I could do in this match. I mean, it's possible that I will take a lot of similar steps and one day the match won't go well. But it doesn't mean that the approach was wrong. The most important thing was to be aware that, to remember that in earlier matches, exactly this sort of thing had tended to go very badly. One day you lose your head completely and you lose the match. And to try and being aware of this danger is sometimes just good enough. So that match finished in 2010. In fact, in the last game, it was my opponent who crumbled under the pressure. He kind of gambled everything on one game. And the gamble didn't work. So that, I think, was a huge relief for me, because the match had been going on till the very end, all 12 games, and it only finished at the end. And if I thought it was going to get easier this time with Boris Gelfand, actually it wasn't. It not only went to 12 games, but it went to the tie breaks beyond. Against Gelfand, I was going to meet someone completely from the other side. No psychological games whatsoever. He was incredibly friendly, well behaved, behaved in a very sportsmanlike way. And I think here the difference is he knew that he would feel very uncomfortable playing any sort of, attempting any gamesmanship. So he decided to be true to himself and just play the way he always does. But he was still incredibly motivated, and I could feel this before the match and during the match. He was very motivated, and though he was not sort of winding me up in the press or trying to do anything to unsportsmanlike, that doesn't mean it was easy. He was putting a lot of pressure on the chessboard where it belonged. This time I couldn't find a single weakness of his to aim for. And in fact, the whole match we kept drifting along. The only thing I told myself was never to lose my patience. So if your opponent is willing to drag it along, you say, okay, no problem, I'll come along as well. And you go till the very end. And if your opponent says, I'll wait for your first mistake, you say, well, I'll wait for yours as well. So you just have to trust that in this kind of war of attrition, you can hang out longer. In fact, we didn't break the symmetry till the very end, till the tie-break day. And even that was chaotic, because I won the second game, I was winning the first game, but I was losing the third, great difficulties in the fourth. A very, very tough match. But somehow hung in there and remained world champion. I think it's been progressively harder for me, these matches. Because the first match I played in 2008, I hadn't played a match in 13 years. So there was that element of looking forward to something, and it was new and exciting and all that. Every match after that, well, it's a little bit less so. And finding a way to deal with that has actually been quite difficult. This, I think, applies to life as well. If you can constantly find something to be excited about, or something that you're looking forward to in your career, it's much easier to go forward, just like I mentioned earlier with the goal. I mean, a clear goal is not possible all the time. Sometimes you have to invent your own goals and find ways to do that. But the last few matches, I basically tried to hold on to my title and think of how much that means to me. But it is getting very difficult to do that after 5 titles. So in this case, you can look for new inspiration. I mean, I can look at some of the young talent that's come into the world of chess, people like Carlsen and Aronia, and try to measure up to them in many ways. Or you can be inspired by some other guy, but you always have to invent some new goals. and find some way to be excited. I mean, you'll often hear people say that when they're very passionate about something, it'll go very well. But it's very difficult to be that passionate about stuff. Sometimes you'll have to settle for just a little bit of enthusiasm and keep it going. And I think the last few cycles has basically been about that. As I've said, it's been, I've felt the struggle for the last few years defending my title for the 5 times. So I think it's very impressive to see a college complete 5 decades and still be pretty excited from what I see. So I'd like to congratulate Chowgule College on their 5 decades and wish them many, many more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.